So unfortunately, thanks to a fairly grueling schedule at my day job and also getting sick in October, I did not get a single video out. However, I figured because I just like to keep that spooky feeling going anyways, why not just go ahead and do the scary games video that I was going to do anyways for Halloween, and that's kind of what I'm going to do right now. So before I start getting into things like, games that are coming up, games that I picked up in any given month, accessories, and all the normal stuff that I would do here on the channel, let's just go ahead and take a step back into October for a second. I'm going to go over some of the scary games that I played, and then hopefully we'll be back to our regularly scheduled programming in the next several weeks. So, all that being said, let's just go ahead and jump in with the first game, which is a low-poly affair that my buddy Kyle recommended to me, and it was a lot scarier than I was expecting, though maybe not in the most conventional way, and that is Sagebrush. Now, Sagebrush is not scary in the conventional sense, but it is horrifying in that unsettling sort of worst parts of humanity kind of way. To that end, I should point out this is 100% not a game for children in any regard, and while it's not an exceptionally long game, clocking in at around an hour and a half to 2 hours, it is highly effective at weaving a dark tale. Sagebrush revolves around exploring the compound of an overzealous religious cult, and the entire area is hauntingly gorgeous with its low-poly aesthetic. You'll explore a variety of exterior and interior environments, the latter of which can be particularly spooky as there's almost no ambient audio save for the sound of crickets outside, the buzz of fluorescent lights when you can turn them on, and creaks in the wooden floorboards of structures littering the grounds that always seem to happen right after you've read some chilling note that you found left behind by the cult members. Most of the story is doled out through audio logs, which isn't really anything new, but I appreciate that there's only about a dozen to find and not just an endless barrage. It's also really well paced in that you can come across nearly every secret organically if you're thorough enough, and it all just feels really well thought out in how the story of Sagebrush unfolds. While there are a few simple unlock puzzles here and there, the bulk of your time will be narrative driven, landing it firmly within the realm of spooky walking simulator. It kind of reminded me of a more sinister take on Gone Home or maybe Firewatch, but not quite as detailed as those games. And all of this is set against, again, a low-poly aesthetic that falls somewhere between PS1 and 90s PC graphics. Not wholly one or the other, but as night closes in while the narrative pushes forward, artistically it's an easy world to get absorbed in. And in turn, deck performance runs at or beyond 60 FPS without any tweaks, so you can fire it up and go pretty quickly. Now, it's certainly not going to be a game for everyone given its slower pacing and complete lack of combat, but if you love a good unsettling tale to take in that maybe despite some voice acting shortcomings does have some real heart, I think it's worth a look for sure. Now, moving on to some lighter fare that you wouldn't explicitly call scary necessarily, but definitely spooky, and certainly spookier than I was expecting it to be, is a game that I'd seen pop up on Game Pass over and over but never gotten around to playing, and I cannot remember how it got into my library. It might have been Humble Choice, but anyways, that game is Beacon Pines. And again, I'd scrolled past this at least a few times on Game Pass, but I kept seeing it pop up in the comments over and over again, but for whatever reason I just never gave it a fair shake. But now that I have, I'm pretty pleased with it so far, as it has a weird combination of cozy and spooky. What starts off as a chipper storybook adventure that reminded me more than a little bit of Animal Crossing right down to the cutesy beep speak, ended up being more like Stranger Things the deeper in I got. In Beacon Pines you play as Luca Van Horn, a 12-year-old who's gearing up for the summer with his friend Rolo. But what starts as a day of whimsical adventure starts to take a darker turn, and before you know it you've got a legitimate mystery on your hands that hints at something spooky, if not outright unsettling, going on in the small town of Beacon Pines. The whole thing plays out like a choose-your-own-adventure book, with critical moments where you can choose what path you'll take based on the charms you've discovered in the world. These charms serve as action words that alter the course of Luca's decision-making, but what makes it better than a traditional choose-your-own-adventure book that you might have read as a kid is that you can instantly roll back to a major decision point and alter how everything plays out without having to backtrack through the entire narrative for the privilege. And I was pleased to see that sometimes choosing a different charm at a pivotal moment drastically alters the story more than just superficially. Beyond the cozy, spooky vibe Beacon Pines puts off, it's also really sharply written with interesting characters and legit laugh-out-loud humor that had me cackling at a few points. I'd say it mostly reminded me of young adult horror books I read when I was a kid, like, well, Goosebumps for sure, but also scary stories to tell in the dark, and yet for all the creepy stuff you start uncovering as you dig deeper into the mystery, Beacon Pines has a whole lot of heart as well. Beneath the cutesy characters and story beats, it all feels like it speaks to some more mature themes. Not in an age-restrictive way necessarily, but rather it just feels like it's telling a completely enjoyable story despite how dismissive you might be with a bunch of adorable forest creatures that are doling out the story beats in, again, cutesy beep speak. Beyond just reading and making choices, there are some limited moments of environmental interactivity, but by and large the interesting story, solid voice acting, and a hunger to see more of just how dark the mystery gets are really what kept me turning the pages. Performance is rock solid on the Steam Deck, and everything from navigating its storybook world to opening up new paths feels cohesive and satisfying. And while so far it's certainly not as sobering as something like Sagebrush, it's definitely a small step up from the spooky vibe of something like, say, Luigi's Mansion. Alright, so I think that's enough of the narrative-heavy stuff. Now let's move on to something that's a little bit more action-oriented in the horror department, and that would be this Cthulhian-steeped FPS that had been in my library forever, and I had not tried it, and now that I have, it is super fun, and that is Forgive Me, Father. Now this was a game I am pretty sure that I got in Humble Choice a few months back, and I thought it looked sort of generic at first, admittedly. For whatever reason, nothing about the game's cover art really grabbed me, and I just kinda glossed over it as one of those games I'd check out eventually at some nebulous point in the future. Well, that nebulous point is now, and wow, I really wish I'd checked it out sooner because it is a whole lot of fun. Forgive Me Father is a Lovecraftian FPS that is just chock full of horrific imagery. And all of it's displayed in a comic book-esque art style that really makes all of the on-screen elements pop when you're getting a headshot off on a zombie, or detonating a red barrel to take out a whole group of Cthulhian nightmares, and it all looks incredibly stylish. You can choose at the outset between a priest or a journalist as your main character, and I went for the journalist since she seemed to be touted as the quicker of the two, and I tend to like a faster playstyle. And on the gameplay front, it feels extremely familiar if you've ever played older FPSs in the vein of Doom or Quake. It's definitely fast and frenetic, but it also has a fair amount of exploration as well, with plenty of secrets and keys to retrieve to move on to each new level. But unlike the original Doom or Quake, I think there's a little bit more of an emphasis on horror here. You can equip a flashlight to light up darker areas as you plot your next move, which I would definitely recommend you do because enemies can literally pop up out of the darkness at any point. So being able to quickly get a beat on your target with the flashlight and then retreating to a more well-lit area to shoot your shot is definitely recommended. All in all, I can't wait to play more of this one since it performs so well on the Steam Deck with a mostly steady 60 FPS, and it seems like this is going to be a shorter game, which I definitely appreciate for the handheld form factor. Everything from the graphics to the intense music that really ramps up when you have to contend with just hordes of enemies is exactly the sort of frenetic experience that I love to jump into, so if you're looking for an FPS with a Lovecraftian twist that'll keep you on your toes, this one definitely is worth a look. Now this next game will pretty much be the antithesis of action horror because it is much more slowly paced, and that would be the Darq puzzle platformer called, well, Darq. D-A-R-Q though. Now I don't remember how this came to be in my library, but I do remember that there was a physical edition of this for the Switch through Limited Run Games sometime back, but I passed on it at the time. And actually I think you can still get physical copies fairly easily on Amazon if you're not keen on a digital copy. But anyways, I finally gave it a go, and while puzzle platforming isn't my favorite genre, when it's steeped in a deeply disturbing horror aesthetic with a dash of Tim Burton, that's something I can definitely get behind. Darq is a 2D side-scroller with a very monotone aesthetic, and not much in the audio department aside from some very effective atmospheric ambiance that really draws you in. You'll be controlling Lloyd throughout the game, and the levels are supposed to evoke the feeling of a zero-gravity lucid dream. You'll frequently shift the environment around to different perspectives as a means to retrieve items that will let you work through each area's puzzles. And this isn't a particularly long game, but there are a few additional DLC chapters that are included if you purchase the complete version of the game. Again, typically I'm pretty lukewarm on the puzzle platformer genre, but honestly Darq's approach feels so refreshing that while I meant to capture about 20 minutes or so of gameplay, I got sucked in for almost an hour and a half straight, so I'm definitely looking forward to wrapping this one up during my extended Halloween, which I imagine will last through Thanksgiving at this point. Deck performance is pretty much solid considering it's not a very technically demanding game, and I think it's a pretty good fit for the handheld format if you're looking for a lightweight spooky experience to dive into on some crisp fall evening. But if you're looking for a multiplayer horror experience, this next game I am very pleased to add to this list because, at least for a while, it was not a verified title on the deck, I believe due to anti-cheat measures, although now it is a fully supported title on Steam Deck, and that is Dead by Daylight. And I gotta tell ya, I was completely split on whether or not to include this one. It's a 7-year-old game at this point, which puts it in that weird middle ground where it's not old enough to be called retro or even really dated, but it's not brand new enough to really be a shocking addition to a horror list. But I had to include it here because I only played it briefly on the Switch back in like 2017 or 2018 I think, and gradually I just sort of got away from it. But after getting back into it over the past couple of months, I have to say I only scratched the surface of the fun you can have with Behavior's take on the asymmetrical multiplayer horror genre. Wow, that is a mouthful. Now the premise is pretty straightforward as there's only one game mode. One killer versus 4 survivors, and that's it. But it's the vast array of killers, survivors, maps, perks, and add-ons that make it a devilishly fun cat and mouse game, and I just can't get enough of it. Trying to complete generators and power the exit is stressful and thrilling in a fun sort of way, and chasing down survivors to prevent them from completing this crucial task is twisted good fun considering there are so many horrifying ways to deal with your prey. But here's the thing, for all of the macabre set dressing of DBD, it has to be one of the most wholesome gaming experiences I've ever had. For starters, you can absolutely be surprised by or play as a friendly killer and opt not to hunt your prey, but instead just opt to meme around with your survivors for fun. I do this constantly as Ghostface and was delighted that they released the What's Up mask for Halloween. On the flip side, even if you're not playing to be silly for a break from the terror, even in the course of regular play I've gotten so many kind messages from strangers in the post-game of people telling me a good game or offering to party up, or really just giving me tips to make sure I'm a more effective killer or survivor. And this makes hopping into a few matches here and there on any given evening an absolute joy. So if you've never experienced the fun of Dead by Daylight for yourself, there's never been a better time as far as I'm concerned, especially considering we just got done with the Halloween event, which was a ton of fun. Recently we got the Alien chapter released. On top of that, we've got Chucky coming soon as of this recording, and yeah, they're just a whole lot of fun, and the game is still kicking very well 7 years later, I think, at this point. Now, full disclosure, I typically play this on the Xbox, but I did test it on the Steam Deck since it's now a verified title, and while the graphics aren't quite as good as what you'd see on a next-gen console or a beefy gaming rig, it still keeps a pretty steady frame rate overall, and considering I started playing Dead by Daylight on the Switch, it's kind of nice having the ability to run a few matches on the deck while I throw on some cheesy horror flick in the background. Hardly the scariest game you can play, but definitely one of the funnest horror-themed games that I've ever played, and it definitely deserves a spot on this list. Alright, so that's it for this one. Again, super bummed that I was not able to get anything out for Halloween, but hey, better late than never, right? So, moving forward, I should have more videos on the way, things like upcoming releases, recent pickups, that kind of stuff. I should probably do a video on the OLED Steam Deck since that was recently announced after all, and I definitely have some thoughts on it, but yeah, as always, thank you so much for your time and hanging out here on the channel. It really means a ton to me. Please let me know in the comments below if you had a great Halloween, and if so, if you played any scare games, I would love to hear about them. And yeah, that's it for this one. Take care, and I'll see you on the next one.